She had blood on her gloves and a pulse under her fingers when the chief surgeon walked in and told her to get out. The man on the gurney was breathing because of her. His heart was beating because of her hands had refused to stop working for 11 straight minutes, while everyone else in that emergency room stood frozen and useless. And the doctor who hadn't touched the patient once looked at her, looked at what she'd done, and said loud enough for the entire floor to hear, "You're fired. Get out of my hospital before you kill someone." Nobody moved. Nobody argued. Nobody knew that the woman they were watching walk out in shame had once kept 3 soldiers alive in a ditch in the middle of a firefight with nothing but field dressings and willpower. They didn't know. And she had worked very hard to make sure they never would. Before we go further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the stories we tell on this channel don't go where you expect them to go. Drop your city or your country in the comments below. I want to know how far this story has traveled, and if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, hit that like button, because this one is going to hit different. Now, let's talk about Sergeant Nora Vass, and the day a hospital made the worst mistake of its life. The shift had started like every other shift at Cresthaven General Hospital in Ashford, Ohio. Understaffed, overlit, smelling of floor cleaner and old coffee, the kind of institutional exhaustion that soaks into the walls over decades and never fully leaves. Nora Vass arrived at 6:45 in the morning, 15 minutes early the way she always did, changed into scrubs in the women's locker room without speaking to anyone, and checked the whiteboard in the nurses' station before the outgoing night staff had even finished their handoff. She had been doing this for 2 years. She knew every rhythm of this floor, which call lights were hypochondria and which were genuine, which doctors ran late on rounds, which supply cabinets were always low on the same 3 things because nobody ever updated the requisition form. She was quiet. She was competent. She was invisible, which was exactly what she wanted. The other nurses on the floor had varying opinions of her. Denise Alcott, who had worked the ER for 11 years and considered herself the institutional memory of the department, thought Nora was cold. "She doesn't make small talk," Denise had said once, not unkindly, more like she was cataloging a curiosity. "Not ever. You try to joke with her and she just looks at you like she's waiting for you to get to the point." Marcus Freeland, the charge nurse on the day shift, had a different read. "She's the only person on this floor I never have to follow up with," he'd told the nursing supervisor during a quarterly review. "I give her a task, it's done. I don't have to think about it again." The nursing supervisor, a careful woman named Patricia Sue, had noted that in Nora's file with a muted kind of satisfaction. Good nurses were hard to find. Quiet ones who simply did the work without requiring management were rarer still. What none of them knew, what Patricia Sue had not thought to dig into, because why would she? Because nothing in Nora's demeanor invited excavation, was that the competence they were observing had been built somewhere other than nursing school. Nora had graduated from the accelerated nursing program at Kellerman University 4 years ago. Before that, there was a gap in her civilian employment history that she had filled on her application with the phrase military service, 2012 to 2020, and nobody had asked follow-up questions because she'd presented her nursing credentials cleanly and her references had all checked out, and hospitals in Ashford, Ohio were not in the habit of probing too deeply into veterans who showed up qualified and ready to work. She was 34 years old. She had a small apartment 12 minutes from the hospital. She had a cat named Biscuit, who was orange and bad-tempered. She went to the farmer's market on Saturdays when she wasn't working and bought the same things every week. 2 bunches of kale, a container of mixed olives, sometimes bread if the sourdough looked good. She had no social media. She had declined every invitation to happy hour, every birthday gathering, every department potluck, always politely, always with a half smile that suggested she had somewhere else to be, though she almost never did. She was not antisocial. She was careful. There was a difference. The patient came in at 9:17 on a Tuesday. Nora was documenting vitals at the nurses' station when the radio crackle came in. Ambulance incoming, male, mid-50s, suspected cardiac event. BP dropping in the field. She heard the numbers and stood up without thinking about it, the way she always did when numbers came in wrong. His name was Gerald Odom. He was 56, a high school football coach, and by the time the paramedics rolled him through the bay doors, he was the color of old concrete and not fully conscious. His wife had called 911 when he'd collapsed in the kitchen. His daughter, who was 17 and had ridden in the ambulance, was standing just inside the doors looking like she was made of glass and might shatter if someone breathed on her wrong. Nora glanced at the daughter once, registered the expression, the rigid posture, the way the girl's hands were locked together, and made a mental note to come back to her. The attending physician on duty was Dr. Cass Emberg, a competent internist who'd been at Cresthaven for 6 years and was reliable in most circumstances. She arrived at Gerald Odom's bay within 2 minutes, scanned the paramedic report, ordered the standard cardiac workup. Nora was already there, already moving, prepping the IV line with the quiet efficiency that Marcus Freeland had noted and nobody else fully appreciated. It was going fine, controlled. The right people doing the right things in the right order. Then Dr. Reeve Thatcher walked in. The department didn't stop moving when he entered, but it shifted. Something in the ambient energy of the room changed the way a room changes when a weather system moves in. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a slight tightening, a slight redirection of attention. Dr. Reeve Thatcher was the chief of surgery at Cresthaven General. He was 51, silver-haired, built like a man who had played lacrosse in college and still wore that identity like a second coat. He had the practiced authority of someone who had been the most important person in most rooms for most of his adult life, and he walked through the ER like he owned the floor plan. He was supposed to be in the OR. His rounds didn't include the ER. Nobody knew why he was there. He stopped at Gerald Odom's bay and looked at the board, looked at Emberg, looked at Nora, that brief categorizing look that reduced her to her function, and said, "What are we dealing with?" Emberg briefed him. Thatcher nodded, asked 2 clinical questions, and appeared satisfied. He was turning to leave when Gerald Odom's monitor spiked. Not a gradual change, a sudden, ugly jump, the kind that snaps the room's focus like a rubber band pulled too tight. Emberg called for the crash cart. 2 nurses converged. There was a correct, controlled sequence of events underway. The well-rehearsed choreography of a medical team managing a deteriorating patient. Nora was watching the monitor. She was watching Odom's color. She was watching the way his neck muscles were moving. "Hold the cart," she said. Not loudly, just clearly. The room didn't stop, but it paused. Emberg looked at her. "Excuse me?" "His JVD is elevated," Nora said. "Look at the neck veins, his trachea is shifting." She was already at the head of the bed, gloved, her fingers moving with a precision that had no business being in an Ohio ER. "This isn't cardiac tamponade from the original event. Something ruptured. He's developing a tension pneumo." The word landed in the room and sat there. Emberg stared at her. "He came in as a cardiac." "I know what he came in as." Nora kept her eyes on Odom. His presentation shifted. The breath sounds on the right are gone. You can't hear it over the noise in here, but if you put your stethoscope on him right now, you'll hear what I'm talking about. There was a half second where nothing moved. Then Emberg put her stethoscope on Gerald Odom's chest. Her face changed. "Get me a needle," she said. What happened in the next 4 minutes was the kind of thing that people who work emergency medicine tell stories about for years. Not because it went perfectly, but because it almost didn't. Emberg performed the needle decompression. Nora was beside her the entire time, not directing anymore, just present, anticipating, handing instruments before they were asked for, watching the monitor with the specific quality of attention that comes from training yourself to look at 4 things at once in conditions a lot worse than a fluorescent-lit ER bay. Gerald Odom's saturation came back up. His color returned. He wasn't out of danger, but he was stable, and 3 minutes ago he had been neither of those things. Emberg exhaled, looked at Nora, started to say something. Thatcher said it first. "Who authorized that assessment?" The question came from the doorway, where he was still standing, arms crossed, watching. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Nora turned to face him. "The patient was presenting with tension pneumothorax," she said. "The clinical signs were there." "You're a nurse," Thatcher said. Your job is to execute orders, not make diagnostic calls. The diagnostic call was accurate. That's not the point. He took a step into the bay. You interrupted an attending physician's treatment plan based on a hunch. It wasn't a hunch. The room got very quiet. Thatcher looked at her the way someone looks at a subordinate who has just made a fundamental error in social judgment. Not angry exactly, something colder. Dr. Emberg, he said without breaking eye contact with Nora, was this nurse acting within her designated scope of practice? Emberg hesitated. That hesitation told Nora everything she needed to know about how this was going to go. The patient was deteriorating, Emberg said carefully. The intervention was... I'm asking about protocol, Thatcher said. Another pause. She made a diagnostic assessment outside her scope, yes. Thatcher nodded once, turned back to Nora. I'll need to see you in my office. Well, she had known, the moment Thatcher walked through that door, that something like this was coming. She hadn't known the shape of it, but she'd spent enough time in institutional environments, in structures where authority and hierarchy meant everything, to recognize the particular expression on a powerful man's face when someone beneath him has made him feel uncertain, and to understand what usually happened next. His office was on the 3rd floor. It smelled like printer paper and a faint trace of something Nora identified as expensive aftershave. There were framed credentials on one wall and a photo of Thatcher shaking hands with the hospital's board chairman on another. A golf bag leaned against the corner with the casual deliberateness of an object displayed rather than stored. He didn't offer her a seat. She stood. You've been here 2 years, he said. Yes. In that time, have you had any formal complaints filed against you? No. Any incidents? No. He looked at a sheet of paper on his desk. She couldn't see what was on it. Dr. Emberg's preliminary incident report suggests you countermanded a treatment plan in the ER this morning. I flagged a diagnostic finding that changed the clinical picture. That's a generous interpretation. He set the paper down. Here's mine. A nurse with no attending physician credentials made a unilateral decision to redirect an emergency team's response. The fact that she turned out to be correct is not the point. The point is the precedent. The point is chain of command. Nora looked at him steadily. Gerald Odom would have died. You don't know that. The tension pneumothorax was progressing. Without decompression within, you're not a physician, Thatcher said. And after this morning, you're not an employee of this hospital either. The room was quiet. Effective immediately, he said. Your badge will be deactivated at end of business today. HR will contact you about your final paycheck and the terms of your separation. Nora didn't move, didn't flinch. Somewhere in the architecture of her body, something that might have been described as a wall simply absorbed the impact, the way walls do. Is there anything else? She said. Something flickered across Thatcher's face. Whatever he'd been expecting her to do. Cry, argue, apologize. She wasn't doing it. It seemed to unsettle him slightly. No, he said. That's all. She turned and walked out. She changed out of her scrubs in the locker room. She folded them neatly, which was a habit she'd never managed to break, and placed them on the bench. She packed her personal items, hand lotion, a paperback she'd been working through on breaks, the small photo of Biscuit that she'd taped to the inside of the locker door, because that was the kind of small, private thing she permitted herself. Marcus Freeland was waiting in the hallway. I heard, he said. He looked miserable. He was a decent man, and this was visible on his face. Nora, I'm going to file a counter report. What you did in that bay was... Don't, she said. He can't just... He did, she said. It's done. She said it the way someone says something they have spent a long time making peace with, not without feeling, just past argument. Take care of the patients on the floor, Marcus. That's what matters. He looked like he wanted to say more. She was already walking. She passed Gerald Odom's daughter on the way to the exit. The girl was sitting in the family waiting area, still that rigid glass about to shatter posture, but her hands had unclenched, which meant someone had given her good news. She didn't notice Nora. Why would she? Nora was just a nurse walking out. The morning air outside was cold and thin, The specific quality of mid-October in Ohio, with a low sky and the smell of wet leaves on pavement. Nora sat down on the curb at the edge of the hospital parking lot, which was not dignified, but she needed to be somewhere that wasn't inside, and the curb was there. She looked at the asphalt between her feet. In 2014, in a forward operating base in conditions she did not allow herself to think about during daylight hours, she had kept a man named Torres alive for 47 minutes with 2 units of blood, a prayer she didn't pray, and the particular stubbornness that comes from deciding, very simply, that someone is not going to die on your watch. Torres had 3 kids. He'd shown her their photos during a slow afternoon the week before, pulling out his phone with the careful, slightly self-conscious pride of a man who wasn't sure it was okay to be sentimental in front of a fellow soldier. He'd sent her a Christmas card every year for 6 years after she got out. She still had them in a box in the closet. Reeve Thatcher, in his office that smelled of expensive aftershave, had told her she had no business knowing what she knew. She looked at the asphalt and breathed and didn't let herself feel anything she couldn't afford to feel in a hospital parking lot on a Tuesday morning. And that was when she heard it. It started as a sound she identified before she consciously processed it. A specific frequency, a specific rhythm in the air, the beat of rotor blades at low altitude. Her head came up without her deciding to raise it. The helicopter came in from the northwest, and it was military. She knew the model before it cleared the rooftop of the hospital building. A Navy MH-60 Sierra, the kind built for search and rescue and medevac operations, not the kind that landed at civilian hospitals in Ashford, Ohio on a Tuesday morning in October. It was descending. Toward the hospital's rooftop helipad. She stood up from the curb. She wasn't sure why. Some instinct, some old training response, some muscle memory that predated nursing school and Cresthaven General and Biscuit, the bad-tempered cat, surfacing through 2 years of deliberate quiet the way the bedrock surfaces through soil. The helicopter landed. She could see figures moving on the rooftop. 40 seconds later, a man in navy dress whites came through the hospital's main entrance at the kind of walk that isn't quite running, but is everything just short of it. He stopped at the security desk, spoke to the guard. The guard picked up the phone. The man in dress whites turned and scanned the lobby, then scanned the entrance, and his eyes found the glass doors and looked through them, and found Nora. He walked outside. "Are you Nora Vass?" he said. She looked at him. Commander's insignia, late 40s, the weathered quality of someone who had spent considerable time outdoors in conditions that weren't outdoor recreation. He looked like he hadn't slept in at least 24 hours. "I was," she said. He didn't have time for that. "I need your help, right now. I have a downed pilot with penetrating chest trauma and hemothorax. He's been stabilized, but the stabilization is failing, and I have 40 minutes before it becomes catastrophic." He held her gaze. "I was told you were the best trauma medic in the region." "You were told wrong," she said. "I'm a nurse. I was a nurse. I was just fired." "I wasn't told you were a nurse." He said it simply, factually, like the clarification didn't change anything he intended to do. "I was told your name and your location and that you were the person I needed." Behind him, through the glass doors, Nora could see people in the lobby turning to look. She could see Thatcher's administrative assistant in the hallway, on her phone, probably calling Thatcher. She could see the shape of 2 years of careful, quiet anonymity beginning to crack along a seam she hadn't known was there. "Who told you?" she said. The commander said a name. She went very still. It was a name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in 2 years, a name that belonged to a part of her life she had folded away and put in storage, the way you put away winter clothes when the seasons change, except she had put them away and then tried very hard to forget which closet. "That pilot," she said. "How old is he?" 29. She looked at the helicopter on the rooftop. She looked at the commander's face. She looked at the exit she had just walked through with a box of personal items and a paperback and a small photograph of her cat. "I'll need access to whatever you have on board," she said. The commander's shoulders dropped about a centimeter with the relief of a man who has been told yes when he was prepared for no. "We have a full medevac kit, and I need you to understand something," she said. I'm not doing this for anyone at this hospital. I'm not doing it to prove a point. I'm doing it because a 29-year-old is dying, and that's the only reason that matters." "Understood," he said. She picked up her bag. "Show me the way up." They went through the main doors together, past the security desk, past the administrative assistant still holding her phone, past the cluster of staff who had drifted to the lobby window to see what a Navy helicopter at a civilian hospital looked like up close. She did not look at any of them. But at the elevator, just before the doors closed, she heard a voice behind her, Thatcher's voice, carrying across the lobby with the full weight of practiced institutional authority. "What in the hell is going on? Who authorized—" The elevator doors closed. Nora looked at the commander. He looked at her. "He's going to be difficult," she said. "He's welcome to be difficult," the commander said. "We don't need his authorization for anything." The elevator rose. Nora Vass, who had been fired 40 minutes ago, who had sat on a curb in a parking lot and looked at the asphalt, who had folded her scrubs neatly out of a habit she couldn't break, felt something shift inside her that she didn't have a word for. Not excitement, not vindication. Something older and more specific than either. The doors opened onto the roof. The wind hit her face and the rotors were still turning, and 20 feet away the helicopter sat with its bay doors open, and inside that bay, a pilot was running out of time. She moved toward it without breaking stride, and her hands were already steady. The helicopter bay smelled like hydraulic fluid and dried blood, and Nora had both smells memorized from a different life. She climbed in without being helped, which seemed to surprise the flight medic already inside, a young petty officer named Driscoll who was doing 3 things at once and not doing any of them well enough. She could see that immediately. Not because he was incompetent, but because he was frightened, and fear makes the hands imprecise. He had an IV line running into the pilot's left arm, and a chest seal on the entry wound, and a monitor showing numbers that were wrong in 2 different ways simultaneously. "Talk to me," she said. Driscoll looked at the commander, who had climbed in behind her. The commander gave a small nod. "Lieutenant Pierce Calloway," Driscoll said. 29. F/A 18 training exercise, bird strike at altitude, ejected at low speed, but the canopy didn't fully clear. He took impact to the right lateral chest. We have a confirmed hemothorax, right side. I drained about 400 cubic centimeters on scene, but output slowed and then stopped, and now his pressure is dropping again, and I don't—" He stopped, steadied himself. "I don't know if the drain is blocked or if there's a second bleed." Nora was already looking at the monitor, already looking at Calloway's face, already running her eyes down the length of him the way you run inventory. 29 years old, and he had the kind of face that would look younger when he wasn't in pain, which he was, because he was conscious, which was both good and bad. "Hey," she said to him directly, "I'm Nora. I'm going to put my hands on you. Tell me if something feels different when I press." He looked at her. His eyes were glassy but tracking. "Different how?" he said. His voice was the voice of someone conserving energy. Different like sharp, or different like pressure where there wasn't pressure before. "Okay," he said. She palpated his right side carefully, methodically, the way someone does when they have done it hundreds of times in conditions where a mistake costs more than a grade. She found what she was looking for in about 40 seconds. A secondary accumulation, lower and more posterior than Driscoll's drain, which meant the tube was correctly placed but in the wrong position relative to where the blood was pooling now. "The drain's not blocked," she said. "He's reaccumulating inferiorly. We need to reposition or place a second drain." "We're 2 minutes from liftoff," the commander said from the front of the bay. "I know." She was already calculating. "I can do it en route if you can hold altitude and minimize turbulence for about 8 minutes. "I can try." "I need better than try." A beat. "I can do it," he said. "Then let's go," Usher said. The helicopter lifted with the particular lurch of a machine that is in a hurry, and Nora braced without thinking about it, her knees absorbing the movement, her hands not stopping. Driscoll was watching her work with an expression she recognized, the specific look of someone who is competent enough to know they are watching something beyond their current level, and who is, to their credit, paying attention instead of getting defensive about it. She placed the second drain in 6 minutes and 40 seconds, which was not a record but was respectable given that the aircraft was moving and the light was bad, and Calloway made a sound at one point that she had to talk him through. "Stay with me," she said. I know it hurts. Stay with me." "You've done this before," he said through his teeth. "Once or twice." "Where?" "Focus on your breathing, in through the nose." He focused on his breathing. The monitor numbers began slowly to correct themselves. Not dramatically, not cleanly, the kind of improvement that looks like progress if you know what you're reading and looks like nothing if you don't. Driscoll exhaled audibly. "Don't celebrate yet," Nora said. "We need a surgeon when we land. He's going to need the bleed addressed properly. I'm buying time, not solving the problem." "We have a surgical team on standby at the Naval Air Station," the commander called back. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. She looked at the monitor, looked at Calloway, who had closed his eyes, not unconscious, just somewhere inside himself, conserving. She'd seen that before, too. Soldiers got very good at that. Going somewhere internal when the external circumstances were beyond what they could control. She sat back on her heels and let herself breathe for a moment. That was when the commander looked back at her from the front of the bay. Not a casual glance. A look. The kind that meant something was being evaluated. "You flew in one of these before," he said. It wasn't a question. "Lots of aircraft," she said neutrally. "That's not what I mean." He watched her for another second. "You checked the tie-downs when you got in. Before you did anything else. That's not a nursing school habit." She didn't answer. "I looked you up," he said. "Nora Vass. Nursing credentials, Kellerman University. Prior to that, 8 years, service record sealed above my clearance level, which tells me something about what you were doing." He kept his eyes on the flight path. "The person who gave me your name," he said, "if she's still who she was, she's the best you're ever going to find." Those were his exact words. Calloway's monitor beeped once. A fluctuation, minor, self-correcting. "Who's the person?" Nora said. "Colonel Arlen Vicker, retired." The name moved through her like a current through water, invisible but total. Vicker. She hadn't heard that name in 2 years either. Vicker had been her CO during the last deployment. He was the kind of officer who was very quiet and very certain, the type who said exactly what he meant and never what he didn't, who had written her separation paperwork with the expression of a man watching something good leave and choosing not to argue with it because he understood why. He had given her name to a Navy commander she'd never met and said she was the best he'd ever find. "He's retired," she said. "How does he—" "He consults," the commander said. "Informally. Vicker knows everybody, and everybody owes Vicker something. That's how he works." A pause. "He said to tell you he's sorry about the interference." His word. Interference. She understood what that meant. She didn't know how she felt about it. "Tell him I said the timing was inconvenient," she said. The commander made a sound that might have been a laugh in different circumstances. "I'll pass that along," Calloway said without opening his eyes. "Are you two done?" Nora looked at him. "You can hear us." "I'm injured," he said. "Not deaf. Also," he stopped, exhaled. "The pressure feels better, whatever you did. Don't move around to test it." "I'm not an idiot." "Didn't say you were." She checked the drain output. Adequate. 15 minutes. "I know," he said. "You said that already." Tibets. The Naval Air Station outside Millhaven, Ohio, was not a large installation, but it had the particular organized intensity of a place that takes its mission seriously. Clean lines, clear signage, the kind of operational discipline that comes from people who have decided that sloppiness costs lives and have arranged their physical environment accordingly. The surgical team was on the tarmac when they landed, which meant the commander had called ahead during the flight, which meant he planned better than he'd let on. They took Calloway smoothly, efficiently. He went from Nora's hands to the surgical team's hands in about 40 seconds. Before they wheeled him through the facility doors, he turned his head and looked at her over his shoulder, and he said nothing, just looked, and she gave him a small nod that she meant to be reassuring, but which came out, she suspected, as something more like, "Go, you'll be fine, stop looking at me." He seemed to understand. He went. She stood on the tarmac in her civilian clothes, She'd never put the scrubs back on. She was still in the jeans and jacket she'd changed into after clearing out her locker, and looked at the aircraft and then at the sky and then at her hands. The commander came to stand beside her. "They're good," he said, meaning the surgical team. "He's going to make it." "He was going to make it with or without that qualifier," she said. "The bleed was manageable. He lost a lot of blood, but the structural damage was survivable." "You sound certain." "I've seen worse." He let that sit for a moment. Then, "I need to ask you something." She waited. "What happened at Cresthaven this morning? Before I arrived?" She looked at him sideways. "You have that information already." "I have a one-paragraph incident report that Dr. Reeve Thatcher filed electronically about 40 minutes ago from his office. He said the name the way someone says the name of a headache. It describes a nurse who violated protocol and was appropriately terminated. It does not describe what actually happened. A patient presented with tension pneumothorax that had been misidentified as a straightforward cardiac event," she said. "I identified it. I communicated it to the attending physician. The attending physician performed the intervention. The patient survived. And for that, they fired you. For performing an assessment outside my designated scope of practice." She said it without inflection. "Technically correct. Procedurally accurate. And ethically." "That's a different conversation," she said. He studied her face. She was aware of being studied and did not change anything about her expression in response to it. "You're not angry," he said. "I'm very angry," she said. "I'm just not performing it for you." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, she thought, or its immediate precursor. "My name is Commander Dex Sully," he said. "I should have introduced myself properly on the ground. I apologize." "You were in a hurry." "Still." He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was businesslike. "I want to talk to you about something. Not right now. Calloway needs to get settled and I need to make some calls. But later today, if you're available." "I was just fired," she said. "I'm extremely available." They put her in a small conference room with bad coffee and a window that looked out onto a maintenance hangar, and she sat there for an hour and did not look at her phone and tried not to think about Cresthaven General, and mostly succeeded. She was good at the deliberate occupation of her own mind. She'd learned it in the field, where the gaps between action were dangerous territory if you let yourself fill them with the wrong material. She thought about Calloway instead, about the specific sound a chest makes when a drain repositions and the pressure equalizes, which was not a beautiful sound, but was one of the more satisfying ones she knew. She thought about Driscoll, who had been scared and had done his job anyway, and had paid attention when someone better than him was working, which was more than a lot of people managed. She thought about the photograph of Biscuit at the bottom of her bag, which was a small and slightly ridiculous thing to think about, but which was hers, which was a thing she owned, and sometimes that was enough. Commander Sully came back at 2 in the afternoon. He had a second person with him, a woman in civilian clothes, early 50s, the kind of low-key professional composure that suggested either law or intelligence or both. She sat down across from Nora and placed a thin folder on the table and did not open it. "This is Dr. Margot Hess," Sully said. "She works with the Joint Trauma Training Initiative. It's a DoD program, military and civilian collaboration on emergency trauma protocols." Nora looked at Dr. Hess. "What kind of collaboration?" "The kind where we identify gaps in civilian emergency medicine that military trauma experience can address," Hess said. She had a direct way of speaking that Nora found immediately comfortable. No performance. "We've been looking at incident data from civilian ER departments for 2 years. The number of cases where outcomes were suboptimal due to misidentified traumatic presentations, hemorrhagic shock mislabeled as cardiac, tension pneumo missed in the field. It's significant. It's a solvable problem." "What does that have to do with me?" "We need someone who has worked both sides," Hess said. "Someone with serious combat trauma experience who also has civilian medical credentials and can operate in both environments." She paused. "Someone who won't be intimidated by hospital administrators when she knows she's right." Nora looked at her steadily. "You know about this morning." "I know your record from before this morning," Hess said. What happened at Cresthaven today is illustrative, let's say. It illustrates exactly the kind of friction we're trying to address. You want me for a training program? Eventually. Right now, I want you to hear what we're proposing and tell me honestly whether it's something you can see yourself doing. Hess finally opened the folder. We're piloting in 3 civilian hospitals in Ohio and Indiana. The goal is to embed trauma consultants, people with your background, in emergency departments to work alongside attending physicians, not to replace the chain of command, to augment it. Nora was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, someone was moving a tow vehicle in the maintenance hangar, the mechanical reverse beep of it reaching through the glass in regular intervals. The friction you mentioned, she said, the kind that happened at Cresthaven. You know that doesn't go away just because there's a program. No, Hess said. It doesn't. A surgeon like Thatcher will always find a way to... Dr. Thatcher, Sully said, and something in his voice made Nora stop talking and look at him, is going to have some problems to deal with in the very near future that have nothing to do with you. She looked at him carefully. What kind of problems? He glanced at Hess. Some communication passed between them that Nora wasn't privy to. The incident report he filed this morning, Sully said. He described the event in a way that is factually inconsistent with the attending physician's own notes. Dr. Emberg's documentation indicates that the diagnostic finding was clinically valid and that the intervention saved the patient's life. Thatcher's report says the nurse acted recklessly and endangered the patient. He paused. Those two accounts cannot both be true. Nora sat very still. You pulled the hospital records. We pulled what was relevant to understanding the situation of the person we brought onto a Navy aircraft and used in an operational capacity today, Sully said. That's standard, and what we found was, he chose his next word deliberately, concerning. She thought about Thatcher's office, the golf bag, the framed credentials, the photo with the board chairman, the administrative ease of a man who had been making problems disappear for a long time and had gotten very good at it. He's done this before, she said. It wasn't a question. That's not something I'm in a position to confirm or deny, Sully said, but it's not something you're denying. He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She left the Naval Air Station at 4:30 in the afternoon with a card from Dr. Hess, a form to review at her own pace, and a question she wasn't sure she was ready to answer sitting somewhere just below the surface of her sternum like a stone she'd swallowed. The drive back to Ashford took 40 minutes. She drove with the radio off. She had a habit of silence that other people found unsettling and she found necessary. Not because she was afraid of noise, but because her brain did its best work in quiet, always had. And there was a lot she needed her brain to do right now. She got home at 5:15. Biscuit was on the kitchen counter, which he knew he wasn't supposed to be on, and he regarded her arrival with the expression of a creature who has no intention of getting down and does not intend to pretend otherwise. She moved him off the counter with one hand. He went, grumbling, and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street outside. She thought about Vicar, about the fact that he had given her name to Sully without calling her first, without asking, without any heads-up whatsoever. She thought about whether she was angry about that and decided she was, a little, around the edges. In the specific way she was angry at people she trusted for doing things she couldn't argue with. Because she couldn't argue with it. Calloway was alive. Whatever else was true, Calloway was alive. She thought about Gerald Odom, about his daughter in the waiting room with the rigid posture and the unclenched hands, about the specific satisfaction of a monitor stabilizing, not a clean victory, just a body continuing to function that had been about to stop. She had told Marcus Freeland that what mattered was the patients. She had meant it. She was still meaning it. Her phone rang at 6:47. Unknown number, Ohio area code. She answered. Ms. Vass, a man's voice, professional, clipped. My name is Daniel Pryor. I'm with the Cresthaven General Patient Advocacy Office. I'm calling because we've received a formal inquiry today regarding the events of this morning in our ER, and as part of our response process, we'd like to speak with you about who filed the inquiry, she said. A brief pause. I'm not at liberty to... Was it Gerald Odom's family? Another pause, longer. I really can't. It's fine, she said. I'll come in tomorrow morning. She hung up. She sat down at her kitchen table. Biscuit jumped into her lap, which he did approximately never, and settled there with the suspicious warmth of an animal that occasionally remembered it was supposed to be affectionate. She put her hand on him and looked at the card from Dr. Hess on the table, and then her phone rang again. Different number. Also Ohio, but not a number she recognized. She answered. Silence for a moment. Then a young voice, a girl's voice, 17 or so, said, "Is this the nurse from this morning? The one who—" A pause, like the girl was choosing her words carefully. My dad said there was a nurse. He said to find out her name. His name is Gerald Odom. Nora's hand went still on Biscuit's back. He said to thank you, the girl said. He said you told the doctor what was happening when nobody else did, and he wanted you to know that he— Her voice caught, recovered. He just wanted you to know. Nora looked at the window. Tell him I'm glad he's okay, she said. He wants to talk to you, the girl said. Is that okay? He's not supposed to use the phone yet because of the— She stopped. He's giving me the look that means I'm not supposed to explain that part. Nora almost smiled. Almost. Tell him to rest, she said. Tell him we'll talk when he's out. Okay. A pause. He said to ask. He said, do you know what you did? He said it like that. Like he wants to know if you understand. She thought about the conference room at the Naval Air Station, about Hess's folder on the table, about 2 years of quiet and the sound of helicopter rotors cutting through it. Tell him I'm starting to, she said. She hung up and sat with Biscuit and the card on the table and the silence, and it was not entirely the same silence it had been this morning. It had weight now. The specific weight of things about to change. Her phone rang a third time. She looked at the screen. The number was a Virginia area code, and next to it, her phone had recognized the contact and pulled up a name she had not deleted, had never been able to make herself delete, because she was sentimental in the private ways that nobody saw. The name on the screen was Colonel Vicker, retired. She stared at it for 3 seconds. Then she picked up. Nora. Vicker's voice was exactly the same. 8 years and a complete reinvention of her life, and his voice was exactly the same. The particular flatness of a man who had learned to extract all unnecessary texture from the way he spoke, because in the environments he'd worked in, texture cost time. Sir, she said. Old habit. She hadn't called anyone sir in 2 years. I owe you an explanation, he said. You gave my name to a Navy commander without asking me first. Yes. That's not an explanation. That's a confirmation. A brief pause. Not discomfort. Vicker didn't do discomfort. More like he was deciding how much to say and in what order. The pilot's name is Calloway. His father is Brigadier General Thomas Calloway, retired. He and I served together for 11 years. When Deck Sully called me at 0600 this morning, looking for the best trauma resource in the Ohio region, I gave him your name because it's the correct answer to that question, and it has been for 10 years. You could have called me first. There wasn't time. You could have tried. Nora. He said it the way he used to say it in the field when she was pushing back on something he'd already decided. Not a dismissal. A marker. We both know how this ends. Let's get there. Would you have answered? She looked at Biscuit on her lap. Probably not, she said, which is why I didn't call. A pause. I heard about Cresthaven, the termination. Word travels fast. Sully pulled the records. He called me after he landed. Another pause, and this one had something in it she wasn't used to hearing from Vicker. Something careful. I'm sorry about that, about all of it. You went there to have a quiet life. I did. And someone made that difficult. Thatcher, she said. His name is Reeve Thatcher. I know his name, Vicker said, and his tone shifted in a way that was small but distinct. The slight drop in register that she associated with him looking at something from a professional distance and finding it insufficient. I know quite a bit about Reeve Thatcher, actually. That's the other reason I'm calling. She sat up straighter. Biscuit complained and relocated to the other chair. What do you know? She said. What Vicar knew took 12 minutes to explain, and when he was done, Nora sat at her kitchen table in the early evening quiet of her apartment and looked at nothing in particular while the information arranged itself in her head into the shape it was going to take. Thatcher had been chief of surgery at Cresthaven General for 6 years. Before Cresthaven, he'd been at a hospital in Dayton, Memorial West, where he'd left under circumstances that the official record described as a mutual separation, and that the unofficial record, according to Vickers' sources, described as something considerably less mutual. A junior physician at Memorial West had filed a complaint alleging that Thatcher had falsified a post-surgical report to minimize the appearance of a complication that had occurred under his direct care. The complaint had been reviewed internally. The internal review had concluded the complaint was unsubstantiated. The junior physician had resigned 3 months later. 2 years into Thatcher's tenure at Cresthaven, a nurse named Rita Bowen had submitted documentation to the hospital board suggesting that Thatcher had pressured her to alter medication records following an adverse drug event. The board had reviewed it. The board had also concluded it was unsubstantiated. Rita Bowen had transferred to a different department and then to a different hospital entirely within 8 months. Nora was the third. She wasn't the third person to have a conflict with Thatcher. She suspected that number was considerably higher. She was the third person whose situation had generated enough external attention that someone outside the hospital's internal machinery had started paying attention to the pattern. "The patient advocacy inquiry," she said, "the one from Odom's family. Filed this afternoon," Vicker confirmed. "That's the trigger. The family retained a medical attorney. The attorney pulled this morning's ER records and found that Thatcher's incident report conflicts with Emberg's clinical notes in ways that are," he chose his word, "legally interesting." "How did you get all of this?" "Sully has a contact in the Ohio Medical Board, and I have a contact who has a contact in the hospital board's legal department." A pause. "Nora, this matters because Thatcher is going to move quickly now. He knows the Odom family filed that inquiry. He's going to try to get out ahead of it." "By doing what?" "By making sure the version of events that reaches the board first is his version. He has relationships on that board that go back years." Vickers' voice carried something that wasn't quite warning, more like the particular emphasis of a man who has seen institutional machinery protect bad actors before and is trying to make sure she understands how it works. If his version gets established before there's a counter-narrative in place, it becomes very difficult to dislodge. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on the street, headlights sweeping briefly across her window. "What are you saying?" she said. "I'm saying that what happens in the next 48 hours matters. And I'm saying that if you want to just step back from it, take Hess's offer, let the attorneys and the board sort it out. That's a legitimate choice. You've already done more than most people would." But, Vickers said, "you were there. You saw what happened. Dr. Emberg was there too, and from what I understand, she's a decent physician in a difficult position. The question is whether she documents accurately or whether she protects herself." "She hesitated," Nora said, "in Thatcher's office, when he asked whether I'd acted within scope." "I know. That hesitation means she's scared of him." "It probably does." Nora looked at Dr. Hess's card on the table, at the form beside it that she hadn't opened yet, at her own hands. "I'll be at the patient advocacy meeting tomorrow morning," she said. "Whatever else happens." Vicker was quiet for a moment. Then, "Be careful with Thatcher. He's good at this." "So am I," she said, and she meant it in a way she hadn't meant anything in 2 years. Maud. She arrived at Cresthaven General at 8 the next morning. The lobby felt different, or maybe she felt different moving through it. She signed in at the front desk, which she'd never had to do as an employee, and sat in the vinyl chairs of the patient advocacy waiting area and looked at the elevator bank. Daniel Pryor from Patient Advocacy was a trim man in his late 40s who had the energy of someone who spent his working life managing situations that no one wanted to manage and had developed an extraordinarily careful relationship with language as a result. He shook her hand, offered her coffee she declined, and sat across from her in a small conference room that smelled like carpet cleaner. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Of course." I want to be clear about the nature of this meeting, he said. This is an informal conversation as part of our response to the inquiry filed by the Odom family. It's not a formal proceeding. Nothing you say here is being recorded without your consent. I understand. Can you walk me through your involvement in Gerald Odom's treatment yesterday morning? She walked him through it, clearly, sequentially, without editorializing. The presentation on arrival, the numbers, the shift in clinical picture, what she'd observed, what she'd communicated to Emberg, what Emberg had done. She spoke the way she used to write after-action reports, factual, specific, with no gaps left for interpretation. Pryor took notes. His pen moved steadily. When she finished, he looked at what he'd written for a moment. Then he said carefully, "The incident report filed by Dr. Thatcher describes the event somewhat differently. I'm aware. He characterizes your intervention as an unauthorized diagnostic assessment that disrupted the attending physician's treatment plan and potentially endangered the patient." The patient survived because of the correct diagnosis, Nora said. Dr. Emberg's clinical notes should reflect what actually happened. We're in the process of reviewing all documentation. A careful pause. Ms. Vass, I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to understand it's not an accusatory question. He met her eyes. Is there anything in your background, your full background, that is relevant to an assessment of your clinical capabilities? The question hung in the air. She had known it was coming eventually, not from Pryor necessarily, but from somewhere. The moment Sully landed a Navy helicopter on the Cresthaven rooftop and asked for her by name, the window of anonymity she'd been living inside had effectively closed. My background prior to nursing school includes 8 years of military service as a combat medical specialist, she said. I have a sealed service record that includes significant operational experience in emergency trauma management. My separation was honorable. She paused. If those qualifications are relevant to this discussion, I'm prepared to facilitate access to the relevant portions of my record. Pryor had stopped writing. He was looking at her with an expression she'd seen before. The specific recalibration of someone who has just been handed significantly more context than they had 5 seconds ago. That information, he said slowly, was not in your personnel file at Cresthaven. No, she said. It wasn't. She was back in the lobby 20 minutes later waiting for the elevator when she heard Thatcher's voice. He was at the reception desk, speaking to the woman there in the low, controlled tone of someone who is accustomed to having things arranged. He hadn't seen her yet. She stood still, not hiding, just not announcing herself either, and watched him. He was dressed for authority, suit jacket over scrubs, which was a specific power aesthetic she'd observed before. The suggestion of both clinical credibility and executive standing. He was gesturing at something on the reception desk, pointing at a form, nodding with the air of someone confirming an arrangement rather than requesting one. Then he turned and saw her. The moment lasted about 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, several things moved across his face in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation, a controlled flattening that she recognized as the expression of a man deciding how to handle an unexpected variable. Ms. Vass, he said. Dr. Thatcher. I wasn't aware you had business here today. Patient advocacy meeting, she said. It's done. He walked toward her, not aggressively, just deliberately. He stopped at a distance that was professionally appropriate and slightly too close. I want you to understand that the decision yesterday was not personal, he said. It was about maintaining the integrity of our clinical protocols. I understand exactly why you made the decision, she said. Something tightened around his eyes. Good. Then I hope we don't need to... Gerald Odom's family has retained legal counsel, she said. I assume you're aware. The tightening intensified. I'm aware. Then you know that the clinical record is going to be reviewed. She held his gaze without pressure, without performance, just steadily, the way she held her hand steady over a patient. All of it. He looked at her for a long moment. Are you threatening me? I'm telling you what you already know, she said. Have a good morning, Dr. Thatcher. She stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Her pulse was completely normal, which surprised her slightly. 2 years ago, she would have said she was done with confrontation. She had believed it when she said it. Apparently, it was more accurate to say she was done until she wasn't. The call from Sully came at 11 that morning. "Calloway is out of surgery," he said. "They repaired the bleed. He's in recovery. The surgical team said the secondary drain placement bought the time that made the difference." "Good," she said. "He's asking about you. He should be focused on recovery." "He is," Sully said. "He's also asking about you. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." A pause. "Can you come to the station this afternoon?" She went. Calloway was in the station's medical facility, which was small but well-equipped and staffed by people who moved with the particular purposeful efficiency of military medical personnel. He was awake, color returning, with the slightly stunned quality of someone who has recently had a significant quantity of anesthetic leave their system. "You look better," she said from the doorway. "I look terrible," he said. "But I feel better, which I'm told is the direction I should be going." He gestured at the chair beside the bed. "Sit down." She sat. "My father called," he said. "Brigadier General Thomas Calloway, retired, who does not call anyone ever, called this morning from his ranch in Montana, so you can gauge from that how worried he was." "He shouldn't have been," she said. "The injury was serious but manageable." "He was not worried about the injury," Calloway said. "He was worried about me. There's a difference." He studied her face. "He also said to tell you, if you're the Vass who served under Vicar, that he owes your CO a debt, and he's glad the debt got redirected somewhere useful." "You don't need to thank me," she said. "I'm not thanking you yet. I'm getting to it." He shifted slightly, winced, controlled it. "Sully told me what happened at your hospital, before he came to get you." "It's not my hospital." "It was yesterday morning." She didn't answer. "Can I tell you something without you explaining why I'm wrong?" he said. She looked at him. "Depends what you say." "The medic who's trying to be invisible is always the most dangerous one in the room," he said. "I've worked with enough of them to know. You can't train away what you are. You can defer it. You can put it in a drawer. But when someone needs it, it's there." She was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like something a general's son would say." "It sounds like something true," he said. "You spent 2 years being a nurse, and yesterday you saved a patient from pneumothorax in an ER and then saved my life on a helicopter, and you didn't flinch at any of it." He met her eyes. "That's not a person who quit. That's a person who was waiting." She looked at the window. The afternoon light was doing something pale and thin, the low Ohio sun of late October trying and only partially succeeding. "I wasn't waiting," she said. "I was done." "And now?" She thought about the patient advocacy meeting, about Thatcher's face in the lobby, about Emberg's hesitation, about the Odom family's attorney pulling clinical records, about Vickers' voice on the phone saying the next 48 hours matter. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "What?" What changed everything happened 3 hours later, and it didn't come from the direction she was expecting. She was in Sully's office, going through the specifics of Hess's program, not committing, just reading, the way you read something when you're trying to decide if you trust it. When Sully's phone rang, he looked at the screen, held up one finger, stepped into the hallway. She could hear his voice, but not the words. The tone shifted after about 30 seconds, from the brisk navigational quality of a man managing logistics to something flatter, more careful. The tone of receiving information that requires attention. He came back in. "That was Emberg," he said. Nora set down the folder. "What happened?" "She called me directly. I don't know how she got this number." He sat down. "She says Thatcher met with her this afternoon. He came to her office and asked her to revise her clinical notes from yesterday morning." The room was very quiet. "Revise them how?" Nora said. "He wants her to remove any language that supports the accuracy of your diagnostic assessment. He wants the notes to reflect that the intervention was initiated by the attending physician independently, without input from nursing staff." He looked at her steadily. He also told her that if she revised the notes, the Odom inquiry would be resolved internally and quickly, and that her position at Cresthaven would be unaffected. Nora looked at the folder in her hands and then set it down on the desk with the particular care of someone who needs their hands to be empty. She didn't do it, she said. She called me instead of doing it, Sully said, which means she's scared and she's looking for somewhere to put this. It also means, he paused, it means she's willing to document what he asked her to do. She said she wrote it down as soon as he left her office. Time-stamped. That's obstruction, Nora said. Asking a physician to alter clinical records is, I know what it is. Sully leaned forward. Nora, this is beyond an employment dispute now. This is a falsification of medical records and an attempt to obstruct a formal patient inquiry that goes to the medical board, that potentially goes to a prosecutor's office. She looked at him. You're telling me you're going to move on this. I'm telling you I'm making a call in about 10 minutes to a person at the Ohio Medical Board who has been waiting for something documentable on Thatcher for 18 months. He held her gaze. And I'm telling you that your testimony, your account of what happened in that ER, corroborated by Emberg's original notes and her documentation of what he asked her to do today, is the center of that case. He's going to come after my credibility, she said. He already tried once. When there's a sealed service record and a termination on file, it's easy to... Your service record, Sully said, is no longer going to be a liability in this context. He picked up a folder from his own desk. I've been authorized to provide a summary document to the medical board that covers your operational history and qualifications. Not the classified specifics, the framework. He looked at her over the folder. Colonel Vicker drafted it this morning. She sat very still. He drafted it, she said, this morning. Before he called you last night, Sully said, he was already working on it. She looked at the wall for a moment, at nothing in particular. Just the specific blankness of looking at something that isn't the thing you're actually seeing. Vicker had drafted the document before calling her, which meant he hadn't given her name to Sully as an act of emergency improvisation. He had given her name to Sully as the first move in something he had already decided needed to happen. He planned this, she said. I think he identified an opportunity, Sully said carefully. That's the same thing when Vicker does it. Sully didn't argue. Are you angry? She thought about it honestly, the way you think about a question when the easy answer isn't the right one. No, she said finally. I should be. But the thing is, she stopped. Started again. The thing about Vicker is that he's never been wrong. In 10 years of working with him, and sometimes working against him and always watching him, he's never been wrong about the thing that matters. And what's the thing that matters here? She picked up Hess's folder again. Outside, down the corridor, she could hear the distant sound of the facility. Footsteps, a door, the muffled radio frequency of operational communication. Sounds she knew. Sounds she'd spent 2 years replacing with the quieter, slower sounds of civilian life. Thatcher, she said, that's the thing that matters. And after Thatcher, it's the program. It's Hess's program and the gap it fills and the people who won't get a correct diagnosis fast enough because nobody in the room has the right training. She looked at the folder. That's the thing. Sully nodded once. So you're in. I didn't say that. You're about to. She looked at him. He had the expression of someone who has done enough negotiations to know when the outcome is already determined. It was an irritating expression, and it was accurate. She opened the folder. She read for 6 minutes without speaking. Sully waited, which she noted and appreciated. He was good at waiting. Then her phone buzzed on the desk, a text from an unknown number, but with a Cresthaven area code. She looked at it. This is Dr. Emberg. I need to talk to you directly, not through Commander Sully. Can we meet? It's urgent. I have something you need to see. She showed Sully the screen. He read it. His jaw tightened slightly. What do you want to do? She was already standing. Where's my car? She said. Dumb. Emberg had asked to meet at a coffee shop 6 blocks from the hospital. Neutral ground, public, the kind of deliberate choice that told Nora she was scared and smart enough to be scared in the right ways. The coffee shop was called Morrow's, and it had wooden booths and the kind of ambient noise that provided cover without requiring you to raise your voice. Emberg was already there when Nora arrived. She looked like she hadn't eaten today, and possibly not well the day before either. She was 42 and good-looking in the specific way of someone who takes care of themselves out of discipline rather than vanity. But right now, discipline and vanity both appeared to have taken the afternoon off. She was holding a coffee cup with both hands, and she looked up when Nora sat down across from her. And there was a quality in her expression that Nora recognized from the faces of people who have carried something past the point where they can carry it alone. "I didn't falsify anything," Emberg said. First thing, before any preamble. "I want you to know that." "I know," Nora said. I hesitated. "In Thatcher's office yesterday, when he asked me whether you acted within scope, I hesitated because—" She stopped. Her jaw worked for a moment. "Because I've seen what happens to people who push back on him, and I was scared. I want to be honest about that." "You documented accurately," Nora said. "That's what matters." "He came to my office today." Emberg set down the coffee cup. "He said if I changed my notes, the inquiry goes away. He said it like it was a reasonable offer, like what he was describing was a normal transaction." Her voice had the particular flat quality of someone describing something that has retroactively rearranged their understanding of a situation. "I've worked with him for 4 years." 4 years. "What do you have?" Nora said. "You said you had something." Emberg reached into her bag and placed a folded piece of paper on the table. "When he came to my office, I wasn't recording him. I didn't have time to set anything up. But as soon as he left, I wrote down everything he said. Verbatim, as close as I could get, time-stamped." She looked at the paper. "And then I thought about leaving it at that. About just letting it be a piece of paper in my desk and seeing what happened." "What changed your mind?" "I pulled Rita Bowen's transfer records," Emberg said quietly. "From 2 years ago. I had access because she'd been in my department before she transferred, and I read the reason she gave for the transfer." Her eyes came up to Nora's. "She said she needed a change of environment. That's the official reason." A pause. "But she also filed a supplementary note with HR that was marked confidential. I shouldn't have been able to access it. The system's privacy partitions they're not well maintained. I found it by accident." Nora waited. "The note said she had been pressured to alter documentation by a senior physician," Emberg said. "She didn't name him, but she described the circumstances and the department and the time frame, and it is—" Emberg's voice dropped. "It is identical to what happened to me today. The same language, the same offer, the same framing." Nora looked at the folded piece of paper on the table. Then she looked at Emberg's face. "He's done it before," she said. "At least twice that I can document," Emberg said. "And there's something else." She reached into her bag again, this time pulling out her phone. She turned it to face Nora. On the screen was an email, sent from Thatcher's hospital account at 3:47 that afternoon, less than 2 hours ago, to a name Nora didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Vass credentialing." She read the visible text of the email. Her name appeared twice. The phrase unverifiable military claims appeared once. The phrase potential liability for the hospital if she pursues action appeared once. And at the bottom, in language that was careful enough to be deniable and clear enough to be unambiguous, was a sentence that said, "I'd recommend we move to formalize her separation terms before this becomes a board-level issue." Nora read it twice. Then she looked up. "How did you get this?" she said. "He copied me," Emberg said. "I don't think he meant to. I think he meant to copy his administrative assistant. Our last names both start with E. Our email addresses are sequential in the hospital directory." She looked at the phone. "He sent it to me by mistake." The coffee shop ambient noise continued around them. The hiss of an espresso machine, someone's laptop, a muffled conversation from the booth behind them. Nora looked at the email on Emberg's screen. She thought about Thatcher in her office with the golf bag and the framed credentials. She thought about the careful procedural language of his termination, scope of practice, chain of command, precedent. She thought about Rita Bowen's note in an HR system with broken privacy partitions. She thought about the way he had looked at her in the lobby this morning and asked if she was threatening him. She had not been threatening him this morning. She was about to be. "I need you to forward that email to Commander Sully," she said. "Right now from this table." And then I need you to send your written account of this afternoon's meeting to the Ohio Medical Board Licensing Division directly. Not through hospital channels. Directly. Emberg's hands were not entirely steady. If I do this, he's going to try to do to you what he did to Rita Bowen, Nora said. He's already doing it. The only difference is you have documentation he didn't know you had, and you have me, and you have the fact that a Navy commander pulled a fired nurse out of a hospital parking lot this morning because her qualifications exceeded everything Thatcher told this hospital she was. Emberg looked at her for a long moment. "Who are you?" she said. Not rhetorically, actually asking. Before Nora could answer, her own phone buzzed. A message from Sully. Medical board contact is ready to receive. Also, Calloway is awake and asking to make a statement. Apparently he recognized you. He says you two have met before. He says you need to call me immediately. Nora read it twice. She had told Calloway in the recovery room that she didn't know him. She had believed it when she said it. But Sully's message said Calloway recognized her, which was a different thing entirely, and the specific phrasing, "you two have met before," was doing something cold and specific to the base of her spine. She looked up from her phone. Emberg was watching her face. "What's wrong?" Nora didn't answer. She was trying to think of where. She was running through the deployments, the FOBs, the medevac runs, the faces she'd worked on and worked with and said goodbye to and sometimes never seen again. She was running through 8 years of a life she'd folded and put in a closet and tried to stop dreaming about. And somewhere in that inventory, a face was surfacing. 29 years old now. He would have been younger then. Maybe 22. A pilot in training before he was ever in an FA-18. Before Millhaven, before the training exercise, before the bird strike and the ejection and the helicopter bay. The face came into focus, and with it came the memory of a night in 2016 at a forward operating base in a place she was not allowed to name, a transport helicopter going down in bad weather. 3 crew members pulled from the wreckage, one of them with a chest wound that she had sealed in the dark, with her hands, and a flashlight held in her teeth, and the specific stubbornness she'd apparently never managed to lose. She had not known his name then. She'd known his blood type, his injury, his airway, and that he was young. "I have to go," she said. She was already standing. She drove back to the Naval Air Station with both hands on the wheel, and her mind doing the thing it used to do in the field, running parallel tracks simultaneously, the operational and the emotional, keeping them separated by a membrane thin enough to feel but thick enough to function behind. The operational track. Emberg had forwarded Thatcher's misdirected email to Sully before Nora left the coffee shop. Emberg had also agreed to submit her written account of the afternoon meeting directly to the Ohio Medical Board Licensing Division. Those were facts. Those were moving. The emotional track. Somewhere in the medical facility at Millhaven Naval Air Station, Pierce Calloway was awake and asking for her, and apparently knew something she'd spent 8 years not knowing, which was that the 22-year-old she'd sealed a chest wound on in the dark in 2016 had a name and a face and had grown into a 29-year-old fighter pilot who had now, improbably, come back into contact with her hands twice in the same life. She didn't know how to feel about that, and she wasn't going to try until she had more information. Sully was waiting at the facility entrance. He looked like he'd had a productive 2 hours and was also slightly concerned about her, which was an interesting combination on a Navy commander's face. "You talked to Emberg," he said. "She forwarded you the email. I got it 20 minutes ago. I've already sent it to the medical board contact and copied legal." He fell into step beside her. "Nora, this email alone is significant. The language in it, unverifiable military claims, potential liability. He's trying to preemptively discredit you through official channels before any formal proceeding begins. That's not an employment dispute. That's witness interference." "I know what it is," she said. "What did Calloway say?" Sully was quiet for a half-second. "He wants to tell you himself." "Then take me to him." Calloway was more awake than he'd been that afternoon, which meant he was more uncomfortable and less willing to pretend otherwise. The color in his face had normalized somewhat. He was sitting up at about 45 degrees, which looked like it required effort, and he had the particular expression of someone who has spent several hours deciding how to say something. She sat in the chair beside the bed. He looked at her for a moment. Then, 2016, he said. F.O.B. Renner. Do you remember it? F.O.B. Renner. Forward operating base in a location she couldn't name. Mountainous terrain. October, which meant cold nights and the specific quality of high-altitude darkness that felt like the absence of everything. I remember it, she said. Transport helo went down in bad weather. Night approach, wind shear. 3 crew out. He watched her face. I was 22, flight trainee, observing rotation. Wrong place, wrong weather. Very wrong outcome. He paused. I took shrapnel from the impact, right side. He touched his chest, the same side they'd drained twice in the past 24 hours. Old scar's still there, actually. The surgical team yesterday commented on it. She looked at him steadily. There was a medic, he said. Female. She worked on me for, I don't know how long. I wasn't tracking time reliably. Dark, cold. I remember a flashlight. I remember hands that didn't shake. He met her eyes. I never got her name. I was medevaced before I was stable enough to ask, and after that there was no official way to find her. The records from that night are sealed, she said. Classified, he confirmed, above my clearance level at the time, and by the time I had the clearance to look, I'd been told the personnel files from that deployment cycle weren't accessible for individual inquiry. He paused. I stopped looking after a while. You do. Life moves forward. She sat with that for a moment. When I came around yesterday in the bay, he said, I heard your voice before I wasn't all the way there yet. But something about it. He stopped, tried to find the right word, and apparently couldn't, which was honest. I didn't know what I was recognizing. I just knew I was recognizing something. It wasn't until this morning, when Driscoll was describing what you'd done during the flight, the exact technique for the drain repositioning, how you'd talked to me through it, that I remembered. He looked at her directly. You said the same thing in 2016. Stay with me. I know it hurts. Stay with me. The room was very quiet. She had not known she still said that. She hadn't known it was a pattern. It was simply what came out when she needed someone to stay. I've been trying to work out, Calloway said, whether it's a coincidence or whether the world is significantly smaller than I previously believed. The world is significantly smaller, she said, and medicine is smaller still. I want to make a formal statement, he said, about yesterday, about what you did in that bay. Sully told me about what's happening with Thatcher and the Odom inquiry and the medical board, and I want it on record, whatever record matters, that the person who kept me alive on a helicopter yesterday is someone who has been keeping people alive in impossible conditions for a very long time. She looked at him. You don't need to do that. I know I don't need to, he said. I want to. There's a difference. He held her gaze. You told me yesterday you were doing it because someone needed help. That was the only reason that mattered. Fine. This is the same. You need someone to say what you are because apparently you've spent 2 years making sure no one would know. And now it matters that they know, so I'm going to say it. She looked at the window, at the pale late October light going flat toward evening. Your father put Vicar up to this, she said. My father, Calloway said, called Vicar at 0500 yesterday morning because his son was dying and he knew one name that might fix it. Everything else that happened is between you and Vicar and whatever the world apparently had in mind. A pause. Don't give my father too much credit. He just made a phone call. You did the rest. She stood up. Rest, she said. I mean it this time. You keep saying that. You keep not doing it. She was at the door when he said, Sergeant Vass. She stopped. The rank she hadn't heard in 2 years, and it landed differently than she'd expected. Not like a wound, more like the particular sensation of putting weight on a foot that's been asleep and finding it actually still works. Yeah, she said without turning around. Thank you, he said. Both times. She went through the door. And Sully was in the hallway. He had his phone in his hand and the expression of a man who has received news and is deciding how to present it. Medical board, he said. They've opened a formal inquiry into Thatcher. Based on Emberg's documentation in the email, they're treating it as a priority case. They've also flagged it to the hospital board, which means Cresthaven's legal department is now aware that the medical board is investigating their chief of surgery. She absorbed that. How fast does this move? Faster than normal, he said. The email is the accelerant. Attempting to discredit a potential witness through institutional channels while a patient inquiry is active, that's not ambiguous. Their lawyers are going to read that email and immediately start calculating liability. He paused. There's something else. Tell me. The Odom family's attorney submitted a formal records request to Cresthaven this afternoon. Standard process. So they want Gerald Odom's complete ER file from yesterday morning. He looked at her carefully. Which means Thatcher's incident report, Emberg's clinical notes, and the inconsistency between them are now in the hands of a medical malpractice attorney who is being paid to find exactly that kind of inconsistency. She thought about Thatcher going to Emberg's office, making his offer, using his voice and his title and his 6 years of institutional authority to ask a physician to erase what had happened. She thought about the calculation behind it, the certainty that it would work because it had worked before, twice at least, probably more. The certainty of a man who has never had the thing stop working. He's going to try to get ahead of it tonight, she said, before the board meeting tomorrow. He'll want to talk to his allies on the board directly before the legal department gets to them with the liability assessment. Sully nodded slowly. That's my read too. Which means whatever Vickers' summary document says about my record, it needs to be in the medical board's hands tonight. Not tomorrow. It's already sent, Sully said. Vicker transmitted it 2 hours ago. The board has it. She looked at him. How long has he been planning this? Long enough, Sully said, in a tone that didn't invite elaboration. She did not sleep well that night, which she had expected. She lay in her apartment with Biscuit on the other side of the bed. He'd migrated there sometime around midnight, apparently having decided that proximity was acceptable as long as it wasn't contact, and ran through the variables the way she used to run pre-mission checks. What she controlled, what she didn't, what could go sideways and in what sequence. What she controlled? Her own testimony, which was accurate. Emberg's documentation, which was now in motion. Calloway's statement, which he'd given to Sully in writing before she'd left the facility. What she didn't control. How fast institutional machinery moved, how well connected Thatcher's board allies were, whether Cresthaven's legal department would circle the wagons around their chief of surgery or throw him to the medical board to minimize exposure. What could go sideways? Approximately everything, in the way that everything could always go sideways, which was why you checked your equipment and confirmed your exit routes, and then moved anyway. She was up at 5:30, made coffee, looked at Biscuit. Don't look at me like that, she said to him. He looked at her exactly like that. She drank her coffee. The Ohio Medical Board's formal notification reached Cresthaven General at 8:17 in the morning, which she knew because Sully texted her when his contact confirmed it had been delivered. The notification formally opened an inquiry into Dr. Reeve Thatcher on 3 grounds. Inconsistency between filed incident documentation and contemporaneous clinical records, documented attempt to solicit alteration of medical records, and a pattern of conduct consistent with previously submitted complaints. That third item was new. She called Sully. Rita Bowen, he said. The medical board's investigator pulled her HR file last night, the confidential supplementary note that Emberg found. They've been in contact with Bowen directly. She's agreed to provide a formal statement. Nora set down her coffee cup. She's willing to go on record. Apparently she's been willing for 2 years. She just didn't think anyone was going to take it anywhere. A pause. That's 3 documented incidents. The board has grounds for an emergency suspension of Thatcher's clinical privileges pending investigation. They can move on that today. Will they? If the evidence holds up the way it looks from outside, yes. He paused again, and this pause had a different quality. Nora. The hospital board is meeting this afternoon. Emergency session. Cresthaven's general counsel called it. Thatcher is going to be there. And I'm not on the agenda, she said. No, but Emberg is. She's been asked to present her account of the past 48 hours to the full board. A beat. She asked if you'd be available by phone if the board has questions. Yes, she said. She also said, he stopped. She wanted me to tell you that she's not scared anymore. She said you'd know what that meant. She did know. She spent the morning doing something she hadn't done in 2 years, which was going through the box in her closet. The actual box, cardboard, not large, stored on the top shelf behind a winter coat she barely wore, because Ohio winters were real, but the closet shelf was a better reason. It contained her discharge papers, her commendation citations, 3 photographs from the last deployment that she had never been able to throw away, Torres's Christmas cards in a rubber-banded stack, and at the bottom, underneath everything else, her dog tags. She sat on her bedroom floor with the box in front of her and went through it slowly. Not sentimentally, she wasn't built for clean sentiment, but carefully. The way you go through something when you've been avoiding it and you've decided, for reasons that are practical rather than emotional, to stop avoiding it. The commendations were real. The record was real. 8 years of it, and it had happened, and whatever she told herself about putting it away and being done with it, it had simply been waiting in this box on this shelf for the moment when it was relevant again. She put the dog tags in her jacket pocket. She didn't examine why. Her phone rang at 11:43. Unknown Ohio number. Ms. Vass, a woman's voice, formal, measured. My name is Claire Weston. I'm the General Counsel for Cresthaven General Hospital. I'd like to speak with you this afternoon if you're available. Nora was very still. About what? About your separation from the hospital and the events of 2 days ago, Weston said, and about what we can do to address the situation appropriately. The word appropriately did a great deal of work in that sentence, and both of them knew it. I can be available, Nora said. I'll want someone present with me, a representative. Of course, Weston said. 2 o'clock, if that works. She hung up and called Sully. The hospital's general counsel wants to meet, she said. I heard, he said. Vicar called me 10 minutes ago. He's on a flight from Virginia. He'll land at noon. She stopped walking. She was in her kitchen. She had not been aware she was pacing until she stopped. He's coming here. He said he started planning this 2 weeks ago, Sully said. Nora, he's had his eye on Thatcher for longer than you know. You weren't the inciting incident. You were the tipping point. She stood in her kitchen with that information and let it settle. Vicar had been watching Thatcher, had been waiting for something documentable, had given her name to Sully not just to save Calloway, but because he'd known that once she was involved, Thatcher would do exactly what Thatcher always did, and this time to the wrong person. She wasn't sure if she was a tool he'd used or a catalyst he'd recognized, and she wasn't sure the distinction mattered. 2 o'clock at Cresthaven, she said. Tell Vicar. Claire Weston was precise and professionally effectless in the way of someone who has made a career of managing institutional crises without revealing her own reaction to them. She was 50s, gray-suited, with the posture of a person who had sat in difficult meetings for a long time and learned to take up exactly the space she needed and no more. She shook Nora's hand. She shook Vicar's hand. And on Vicar's face there was nothing, just the flat, competent attention he brought to everything. But Nora saw Weston's slight recalibration when she registered the retired colonel beside Nora, saw the quick inventory of him that any good attorney does automatically. They sat in Weston's office on the 4th floor. It was larger than Thatcher's and less decorated, which told Nora something about their respective relationships to the institution. I want to be direct, Weston said. The hospital board met this morning in emergency session. By this afternoon, the medical board notification, the email evidence, and the statements from Dr. Emberg and a former staff member have been reviewed by board members and by our legal team. She placed her hands flat on the desk. Dr. Thatcher's clinical privileges have been suspended pending investigation, effective as of 11 this morning. Nora kept her face still. The board is also conducting an internal review of the 2 prior incidents involving Dr. Thatcher and former staff members, Weston continued. This review will be independent and will report to the board, not through the chief of surgery's office. A pause. Obviously, Vicar said mildly. Weston looked at Nora. Your termination is being reviewed. The board's preliminary position is that the termination was procedurally executed but substantively flawed, given that the clinical outcome of your intervention was, she paused, choosing, unambiguously positive, and given the additional context of your qualifications, which were not adequately documented in your personnel file. My qualifications were not secret, Nora said. I listed military service on my application. No one asked follow-up questions. I understand, Weston said. That's a failure on our end. She said it without elaboration, which was the right way to say it. The board would like to discuss reinstatement. Nora looked at the desk, then at Weston. On what terms? That's what we're here to work out, Weston said. Vicar leaned forward slightly. I want to address something first, he said. His voice was the same voice Nora had known for 10 years. Precise, without warmth or coldness, just signal. The email Dr. Thatcher sent referencing Miss Vass's, and I'm quoting, unverifiable military claims. I want that characterization formally retracted in writing, and I want the board's acknowledgement that her service record, to the extent it can be disclosed, was reviewed by parties with appropriate clearance and found to reflect an exceptional level of operational qualification. Weston looked at him steadily. That can be arranged. I'd also like the board's position on Dr. Thatcher's comment in the incident report that characterized her intervention as reckless. The board, Weston said carefully, is no longer treating that incident report as an accurate account of the event. I'd like that in writing as well. Colonel Vicar. Weston's tone shifted slightly. Not warmer, but more direct. I want to be clear about what we're trying to do here. We are trying to fix this. I am not in this office to negotiate a settlement that protects the institution at Miss Vass's expense. I am here because the board has concluded that serious errors were made, not just procedural errors, but errors in judgment and in good faith, and that the person most affected by those errors deserves better than what she received. Nora looked at her. We are also, Weston continued, looking at Nora now, aware that there are larger proceedings in motion. The medical board inquiry, the Odom family's attorney, the potential involvement of former staff. The hospital is not trying to get ahead of those proceedings. We are trying to respond to them honestly. A pause. That honesty starts here. The room was quiet. Nora thought about Thatcher's office, the golf bag, the photograph. You're a nurse. Your job is to execute orders. She thought about Gerald Odom's daughter in the waiting room with the glass about to shatter posture and the unclenched hands. She thought about a box on a closet shelf and dog tags in her jacket pocket and a 22-year-old in the dark with a flashlight held in her teeth. I'm not looking for reinstatement to the same position, she said. Weston waited. Dr. Hess from the Joint Trauma Training Initiative approached me about a different role, Nora said. A trauma consultant position. Embedding in emergency departments, working alongside attending physicians, filling the gap between civilian ER training and military trauma experience. She held Weston's gaze. I'd like to discuss whether Cresthaven could be a pilot site for that program. Something shifted in Weston's expression. Not surprise, she was too controlled for surprise, but a recalculation. The hospital would be involved in a DoD-affiliated training program. Jointly, Nora said, with appropriate oversight and full transparency, which is what any reasonable institution would want. Weston looked at her steadily for a moment. I'd need to discuss this with the board. Of course, Nora said. Take the time you need. She stood up. Vicar stood beside her. One more thing, Nora said. She reached into her jacket pocket. She placed the summary document, the one Vicar had drafted, the framework of her service record that the medical board had received, on Weston's desk. That's for your files. So the next person who looks at my personnel record doesn't have to wonder. Weston looked at the document, then at Nora. Ms. Vass, she said, for what it's worth, and I understand if it isn't worth much at this point, I'm sorry. Nora picked up her bag. Fix the problem, she said. That's worth more. In the hallway outside Weston's office, Vicar walked beside her in silence for a moment. He had the unhurried quality of a man who has accomplished what he came for, and sees no reason to rush the conclusion. "You planned this," she said. "I identified a situation," he said. "You executed." "That's the same thing." "It's a meaningful distinction," he said, "when the person executing is the one who has to live with the outcome." She looked at him sideways. He was 61 and looked it in the specific way of someone who had spent those 61 years doing things that left marks. She had never, in 10 years, been able to read what he was feeling behind the precision of his face, and that hadn't changed. "You should have called me," she said. "I know," he said. Simple. No defense. She accepted it because it was the kind of acknowledgement that came from him rarely and meant more for the rarity. "Dinner," she said. "You came from Virginia. I owe you at least that." "You don't owe me anything." "I know I don't. I'm offering anyway." They reached the elevator. He pressed the button. "That diner on Kemper Street," he said. "Your apartment's in that neighborhood, isn't it?" She looked at him. "How do you know where my apartment is?" He said nothing. "Vicar." "The coffee is better than I expected for Ohio," he said. The elevator opened. She stepped in, and her phone buzzed with a message from Sully. "Thatcher is at the hospital. He came in 20 minutes after his clinical privileges were suspended. He's in the administrative wing. Weston's assistant just called security. You should know." She read it twice. The elevator doors began to close. She put her hand on the door sensor and held it open. Because Thatcher was in the building and his clinical privileges were suspended, and he had come in anyway, which meant he wasn't done, wasn't accepting it, was doing what a certain kind of man always does when the ground shifts under him, which was to go back to the place where his authority had always been absolute and refuse to believe it wasn't anymore. And the Odom family's attorney was due to arrive at Cresthaven at 3 o'clock for a records review, which was 40 minutes from now, which meant Thatcher knew exactly what he was walking into the middle of. "What floor is the administrative wing?" she said to Vicar. He looked at her hand on the elevator sensor, at her face, at the phone in her hand. "Third," he said. "South corridor." She pressed 3. The doors closed. The third-floor south corridor of Cresthaven General was the kind of hallway that existed in every institutional building Nora had ever been in. Neutral carpet, fluorescent light, doors with name placards, and the specific silence of people working behind closed ones. It should have been unremarkable. It wasn't, because Reeve Thatcher was standing outside Claire Weston's office with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and there were 2 security officers flanking him at a respectful distance that was also a functional one, and a third person Nora didn't recognize. A man in a suit, 50s, the practiced stillness of someone accustomed to being the most important person in institutional settings, was speaking to Thatcher in a low voice that had the quality of someone trying to de-escalate a situation that has already escalated. Thatcher saw her when she came around the corner. The look on his face was not what she expected. She had expected anger or calculation or the controlled authority face he'd worn when he fired her. What she saw instead was something raw, the expression of a man who has spent his career arranging outcomes and has just realized in real time that an outcome is being arranged around him and that he has no purchase on it. It lasted about 2 seconds. Then the control came back. But she had seen what was underneath it. "Ms. Vass," he said. His voice was level. "I'd like to know why your name keeps appearing in conversations about my professional standing." "Because I was in the ER on Tuesday morning," she said, "and I'm apparently hard to make disappear." The suited man beside Thatcher put a hand on his arm. Thatcher didn't look at him. "You did this," Thatcher said. Not loudly. That was the thing. He said it quietly, which made it worse. "You filed a false incident report," she said. "You asked Dr. Emberg to alter her clinical notes. You sent an email attempting to discredit me before any formal proceeding had begun." She held his gaze. "I didn't do anything. You just ran out of people who were willing to disappear." Weston's office door opened. Weston herself stood in the doorway, looking at the hallway scene with the expression of someone who has been monitoring the situation through the door and has decided it's time to manage it directly. "Dr. Thatcher," she said, "I think we should continue this conversation inside." "I'm not interested in a conversation," Thatcher said. I'm interested in understanding how a terminated nurse has managed to generate a medical board inquiry into my practice in under 48 hours. The answer to that question, Vicker said from beside Nora, is that the medical board inquiry is based on documented evidence that predates Ms. Vass by approximately 2 years. She accelerated it. She didn't create it. Thatcher looked at Vicker for the first time. That look lasted longer. Assessing. Recalibrating. And you are? Someone who has been watching institutional actors protect incompetent colleagues for a very long time, Vicker said pleasantly, and who finds it considerably less interesting than watching them stop. The suited man beside Thatcher, his attorney, Nora had worked it out by now, put a firmer hand on his arm. Reeve, inside, now. Thatcher let himself be moved, but at the door he turned back once, and he looked at Nora with an expression she was going to remember for a while, not because it frightened her, but because it was honest in a way his professional face never had been. It was the look of a man who has finally encountered a wall he cannot talk his way through. The door closed. The Odom family's attorney arrived at 3 o'clock precisely. His name was Warren Galt, and he was a compact man with wire-rimmed glasses and the specific efficiency of someone who charges by the hour, and has therefore become very good at not wasting minutes. He shook Weston's hand, shook Nora's hand, looked at the summary document Vicker had drafted that was now part of Cresthaven's file, and spent approximately 90 seconds reading the key sections before looking up. The clinical record as filed by Dr. Emberg supports the nurse's diagnostic assessment as accurate and clinically decisive, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Weston said, and the incident report filed by Dr. Thatcher contradicts Dr. Emberg's clinical notes in material ways. Yes. And Dr. Thatcher subsequently asked Dr. Emberg to revise those notes. Dr. Emberg documented the request and declined to comply, Weston said. That documentation has been provided to the Ohio Medical Board. Galt looked at Nora. Mr. Odom would like to speak with you, he said. He's been asking about you since he was cleared to have visitors. His daughter also. They want to understand what happened. I know, she said. I'd like to speak with them too. He's still impatient, Galt said. 5th floor. They said any time today. She went after the meeting ended, took the elevator to 5, walked the corridor to Gerald Odom's room, knocked on the open door. He was sitting up in bed, significantly more color than he'd had 2 days ago, which was the right direction, with his wife on his left and his daughter on his right, and the collective expression of a family that has been frightened and is still in the process of deciding how to stop being frightened. His daughter saw her first. The girl stood up. She was still that quality of fragile looking that Nora had clocked in the waiting room, but something in her posture had changed. Less glass, more something that hadn't quite found its shape yet. You're the one, the daughter said. I talked to you on the phone. Marisol, her mother said softly. She is, Marisol said, not rudely, just accurately. Nora looked at Gerald Odom. He was 56, and he looked like a man who has been close enough to the edge to see what's on the other side, and has come back with a specific relationship to the present tense. He met her eyes with the directness of someone who has decided to stop hedging. I know what happened, he said. Galt explained it. Dr. Emberg explained it. You identified what was wrong when nobody else had, and you told the doctor, and she fixed it. He paused. And then they fired you for it. Yes, she said. There wasn't a better word for it. That's... He stopped. His jaw worked for a moment. I want you to know that my family is filing the complaint because it's the right thing to do. Not because we want money. Because what happened to you while you were saving my life is wrong, and someone needs to say so formally. His wife reached across and put her hand over his. He let her. Thank you, Nora said. For what it's worth. And I know it's a strange thing to say. I'd do it again, the same way, in the same circumstances. I know, he said. That's what worries me. Not unkindly, with the weary precision of a man who has thought about it. How many times has something like that happened and nobody filed a complaint? How many times did someone see what you saw and do what you did and then just, he made a gesture, disappear? She thought about Rita Bowen, about the confidential supplementary note in a broken HR system, about 2 years of quiet in a town she'd chosen because nobody would look for her there. More than you'd want to know, she said. Thatcher resigned at 4:47 that afternoon. She knew because Sully texted her the moment his contact at the board confirmed it. The resignation was submitted in writing to Cresthaven's board chairman, a letter that Weston had described to her later as containing the word regrettable 4 times and the word sorry not once, which told you everything you needed to know about how Reeve Thatcher understood the situation even in its final moment. His clinical privileges, already suspended, were formally revoked by the Ohio Medical Board the following morning, pending the outcome of their investigation. The investigation, which would eventually span 16 months, pull records from both Cresthaven and his prior position at Memorial West, and include testimony from Rita Bowen, Cass Emberg, and 4 other current or former staff members, was not something Nora followed closely in real time. She heard the updates when Sully passed them along. She did not find herself needing them the way she'd expected to. The thing about consequences she'd learned was that they were less satisfying as spectacle than as fact. Thatcher was gone. The clinical record was corrected. Emberg had documented the truth. Rita Bowen had finally been believed. Those were facts. They happened in the world and stayed there. Whether Thatcher felt the weight of them was his problem, not hers. What stayed with her, what she turned over in her hands in quiet moments the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath, was simpler. He had been doing it for years. To Rita Bowen, and whoever was before Rita Bowen, and probably someone before that, stretching back to whatever early success had taught him that his authority was total and his position was permanent. And it had worked every time, because the people he did it to had believed, on some level, that they were what he said they were: temporary, replaceable, not worth the fight. She had believed it too, for about 30 minutes, sitting on a curb in a parking lot looking at the asphalt. Then a helicopter had landed. She didn't think the helicopter was the point. She thought the point was the 30 minutes on the curb, what she'd done with them, which was grieve the loss and stay angry and not perform either and then stand up when it was time to stand up. She thought about that a lot. The Joint Trauma Training Initiative's pilot program at Cresthaven General was formally approved 6 weeks after Thatcher's resignation. Dr. Margot Hess flew in from Washington for the signing, which was not a ceremony anyone filmed or wrote about. It was 4 people in a conference room signing a memorandum of understanding and then drinking bad coffee, but which had the specific weight of something that mattered. Nora's title was Trauma Integration Consultant. It was not a title anyone had held before because the role hadn't existed before. Her mandate was to work alongside the ER attending physicians, not above them, not replacing them, but alongside them, in the specific way that someone with a different set of tools operates next to someone with a different set of tools when they are both trying to do the same thing. She was not reinstated as a floor nurse. That wasn't the right role anymore, and she knew it. Marcus Freeland, when she told him, said, "Thank God, because I was going to have to follow up with you constantly, and I'm too old for that." She almost hugged him. She didn't, because she was still herself, but she almost did. The first week was not smooth. It was never going to be smooth. The ER physicians were polite in the way that competent professionals are polite to someone they're still evaluating, cooperative on the surface, watchful underneath. She didn't blame them. She was new to their space in a new way, and trust was not something you installed. It was something you accumulated, and it accumulated in the specific currency of showing up and being right when it mattered, and being wrong without catastrophizing and doing it again the next day. There were 3 attendings who were genuinely curious, and 2 who were visibly skeptical, and 1, a surgeon named Dr. Petra Ogilvie, who had been at Cresthaven for 9 years and had a reputation for being difficult, that Nora suspected was code for has strong opinions and is right about them frequently, who watched her for the first 4 days without saying much, and on the 5th day came to her in the break room and said, without preamble, "The tension pneumo call you made on Tuesday. Walk me through your differential." Nora walked her through it. Ogilvie listened without interrupting, which was its own kind of respect. When Nora finished, she said, "How long did that assessment take?" "About 40 seconds from the first abnormal sign." Ogilvie was quiet for a moment. 40 seconds, she said. "I had a patient 3 years ago. Similar presentation. I caught it at about 4 minutes." A pause. He survived, but 4 minutes is a long time. It is, Nora said. What do I need to look for that I'm probably not looking for? It was not the question of a woman who felt threatened. It was the question of a good physician who wants to be better, and Nora felt something open in her chest at the clarity of it. Can we get some coffee? Nora said. They talked for an hour and a half. They were, Nora suspected, going to keep talking for a long time. Pierce Calloway was discharged from the Millhaven Medical Facility on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the bird strike. He sent her a text. She'd given him her number somewhere in the chaos of those 2 days, she didn't remember exactly when, that said, cleared for discharge, back to the land of the living. Also, my father wants to know if you'll have dinner with us sometime. I told him I wasn't going to ask. He told me to ask anyway. She stared at the message for a moment. Then she typed, tell him yes. But next time you're in Ohio, not Montana. I have a cat who objects to long car trips. He replied with a single question mark, which she took as fair. She had not told him about Biscuit. She hadn't told most people about Biscuit because there was something about telling people you had a bad-tempered orange cat that lived on your counter and sometimes sat in your lap when it suited him that felt like giving away something private. But she was, apparently, in a phase where private things were becoming less airtight, and she was still deciding how she felt about that. On a Tuesday afternoon, 6 weeks into the program, she was in the ER when a 40-year-old man came in from a construction site with traumatic crush injury and what the paramedics had logged as shock secondary to blood loss. She was at the nurse's station when he came through the doors, and she moved the same way she always moved, without deciding to, just moving, and stood beside the attending and looked at the patient and said quietly, his pressure's low, but his HR is too slow for pure hemorrhagic shock. What was his medication list? The attending, a resident named Dr. Yusuf Anand, second year, sharp and undefensive in the way good residents sometimes were, looked at her. Beta blockers, he said. He's on metoprolol. Masking the tachycardia, she said. The real loss is worse than the numbers show. Anand turned back to the patient and revised his fluid order immediately. No argument, no hierarchy demonstration, just a physician taking good information and using it. It lasted about 25 seconds. Later, Anand found her in the hallway. That would have cost us a lot of time, he said. It would have, she said. How do I start seeing it faster? She looked at him. He was maybe 28, the age Calloway had been the first time she'd worked on him in the dark. He had the specific quality of someone who wants to be good at the thing they've chosen, which was the quality she trusted more than almost any other. Come find me before rounds tomorrow, she said. Bring the last month of cases where the initial assessment was revised within the first hour. That's a lot of cases. I know, she said. Bring them anyway. What? The Ohio Medical Board issued its final determination on Reeve Thatcher 11 months later. The investigation found that he had engaged in a pattern of conduct constituting unprofessional behavior, including documented attempts to influence the clinical records of colleagues on at least 3 separate occasions. His medical license was revoked. The determination was public record. It appeared in the board's published disciplinary report and was searchable by anyone with a reason to look. Nora read it in her car in the hospital parking lot on her lunch break. All 12 pages. She read it the same way she read after-action reports, carefully, completely, looking for the thing that didn't add up, and finding this time that everything added up. The name Rita Bowen appeared 4 times. The name Cass Emberg appeared 7 times. Her own name appeared twice, in the section describing the inciting incident that had brought the pattern to the board's attention. She sat in the car for a while after she finished. She thought about the thing Gerald Odom had said. How many times has something like that happened, and nobody filed a complaint? And she didn't have an answer to it, because the answer was the kind of number that didn't stay still when you tried to count it. It was every person who'd been told they were wrong when they were right, and had believed it long enough for it to stick. Every Rita Bowen who'd written a note in a confidential file and then transferred departments and tried to move forward. Every person who had sat on a curb and looked at the asphalt and thought, maybe they're right about me. She had sat on that curb. She had gotten up. Not because a helicopter landed. The helicopter was timing, was Vickers' planning, and Calloway's bad luck converging in a single Tuesday morning. She had gotten up because sitting on the curb long enough to grieve something was different from sitting there long enough to accept it, and she had always known the difference, even when she'd been too tired to act on it. That was the thing nobody told you about the people who seem unshakable. They were not unshakable. They were people who had learned to sit with the shaking long enough to let it pass, and then to get up and do the next thing. She put the board report in her bag. She went back inside. Rosette. The program's 6-month review was held in December, in the same conference room where she'd met with Weston, which now smelled less like carpet cleaner and more like the coffee someone had left on the credenza. Dr. Hess flew in from Washington. Sully attended remotely, his face a small rectangle in the corner of the laptop screen. Vicar did not attend because Vicar did not attend things that had already been decided. He was a man who arranged outcomes and then moved on to the next arrangement. He had texted her the morning of the review. "Report when you're done." 3 words. She had replied, "Yes, sir." 2 words. It was the most sentimental exchange they were capable of, and it was enough. The data was not perfect. It was never going to be perfect. The program was 6 months old, and the metrics were still being refined, and there were integration problems she'd identified and documented and was midway through addressing. 3 of the attending physicians had come around. 2 were still watchful. Ogilvy had become, improbably, the program's most vocal internal advocate, which Nora suspected had more to do with Ogilvy's competitive relationship with her own limitations than with any particular affection for Nora, and which was fine because the effect was the same. What the data showed, imperfectly but unmistakably, was this. In the 6 months since the program embedded a trauma integration consultant in Cresthaven's ER, the average time from patient arrival to correct diagnosis in complex trauma presentations had decreased by 31%. There had been 2 cases in which the consultant's input had directly contributed to a revised treatment plan within the first 30 minutes of presentation, both of which the attending physicians had documented as clinically significant. Hess presented the numbers without editorializing. She didn't need to. "The DoD wants to expand," she said. 3 additional sites in the pilot, 1 in Indiana, 1 in Michigan, 1 in Pennsylvania. The question is whether Cresthaven's experience gives us enough to build the template. Nora looked at the numbers on the screen. Thought about Anand, who now brought his complex cases to her before she had to ask. Thought about Ogilvy, who had sent her a text last week at 11 p.m. that said simply, "Caught a masked hemodynamic instability tonight, beta blocker patient. Thought you should know." Thought about the attending whose name she hadn't mentioned yet, Dr. Russell Farr, the most resistant of the skeptics, who had said nothing directly to her for 3 months, and then last week, in the hallway after a difficult case, had stopped beside her and said, "Good catch," and walked on, which in the specific language of a guarded physician was approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. Nothing was fixed. The ER was still understaffed on certain shifts. The supply chain for certain medications was still inconsistent. The integration between the trauma consultant role and the existing chain of command still had friction points she was mapping and hadn't resolved. People were still imperfect. Institutions were still imperfect. She was still imperfect, which she knew because she still occasionally lost patience with slowness. Still sometimes had to remind herself that not everyone in the room had spent 8 years in conditions that accelerated every instinct she had. But the 31% was real, and Anand was learning, and Ogilvy had sent that text at 11 p.m. "Yes," she said. "We have enough to build the template." Then, after the meeting ended, she took the elevator to the 5th floor. The floor where Gerald Odom had been a patient, though he'd been discharged for months now. She stood at the window at the end of the corridor and looked out at the Ashford afternoon, which was December, gray and flat and unremarkable, and also, because she was looking at it, hers. She had not planned to end up here. She had planned to disappear, which she was apparently constitutionally incapable of doing for longer than 2 years at a stretch. And then a helicopter had landed, and a man with a 20-year-old scar on his chest had looked at her face and remembered the dark and the flashlight and the hands that didn't shake. And here she was. In her jacket pocket, where the dog tags had been on the day she sat in Weston's office, there was now something different. The card Hess had given her the first day, slightly worn at the corners from being handled, because she'd kept it there for 6 weeks before committing, and handling it had been her way of deciding. She pulled it out and looked at it. Dr. Margot Hess, Joint Trauma Training Initiative. The number. The email. The small government seal in the corner. She put it back. She had spent 8 years being a soldier who was very good at her work. She had spent 2 years trying to be only a nurse. And she had spent 6 months learning that the line between those two things was not a wall, but a seam, and that the seam was where she actually lived, in the gap between what military medicine knew and what civilian medicine didn't know yet, in the space between the arriving patient and the correct diagnosis, in the 30 seconds between a monitor spiking and someone in the room knowing what it meant. That was the work, not the title. Not the vindication, though the vindication had mattered, and she wasn't going to pretend it hadn't. She'd needed Thatcher's file to close and the record to be corrected, and her own name in the board report as the person who'd brought a pattern to light, because that was justice, and justice was not a small thing. She'd needed Calloway to remember. She'd needed Weston to apologize and mean it. She'd needed all of it, and now she needed to do the next thing. Her phone buzzed. A text from Anand. In early tomorrow. Bringing the cases. Also, I have a question about tension pneumo that's been bothering me for 2 weeks. She typed back. Bring it. She looked out the window for another moment. The parking lot below was the same parking lot where she'd sat on the curb. She could see the approximate section of curb from here, which was not meaningful in any particular way except that she could see it, and the scene felt complete in a way that didn't require anything added to it. She turned away from the window. She took the elevator down. She went back to work. Because that was, in the end, the thing that had always been true about her. Not the rank, not the record, not the sealed file or the commendations in a cardboard box or the dog tags she'd carried in her pocket as a reminder of something she was still figuring out how to carry. Not the helicopter or the vindication or the 31%. The thing that was true about her was simpler and harder than any of those things, and it was this. When someone needed help, she helped, and she did not stop until the job was done. She had tried to retire that quality, once. It had waited, and now it was hers again, in the open, in the daylight, with no apology and no hiding and no one left in the building with the authority to send her home for using it. The ER doors slid open as she approached them. She walked through,